Squishmallows are those ridiculous, stupid stuffed animals that you see in just every grocery store at this point. In case it didn't go without saying, I'm not a huge fan. I think I just don't really get it. I think they get related a lot to something like a Funko Pop, which my brother collected, so I had a good chance to get really close to a lot of them and even owned a couple myself. Funkos, well, they all have the same frame. There's so much fan service that goes into all the different titles that they have. As a fan of a certain series or show or type of music, every Funko has something that feels very unique and personal. They do put in a lot of work to making these things special. Squishmallows just doesn't feel like that as much. They feel very boring. And if you're a Squishmallow fan, more power to you. Keep doing what you're doing. I'm not necessarily a fan, but I'm also not bothered when someone has one, because really, your Squishmallows aren't hurting anybody. But what if they could? If given the means to do so, could a Squishmallow kill you? I'm changing the lights. I thought it'd be scary. Basically, we're talking like a Toy Story situation. These things gain sentience or have always had sentience and decide that they want to take a human life. How would they do it? The first question is literally, how would they do it? The mechanics of the murder. There's some different options here. The first thing that I thought of is going from a high place, get that terminal velocity, more speed, more damage, pretty straightforward. The next would be just to ram someone. They can't hit, obviously, but just throwing their bodies at you. We don't know how strong these things really are in a sentient capacity. Who knows, right? And the next is to get past their potential physical ineptitudes, maybe some intelligence, build a catapult, start launching. Seems reasonable enough. I think all of these just don't quite work because it's assuming too much about them. Do they understand the laws of gravity and physics? Who knows? Are they physically gifted? I doubt it. Are they intelligent? I doubt it. I just don't really think that any of those make sense. I just don't really think that any of those make sense for how a Squishmallow would actually act and what their game plan would be. And then it dawned on me that they actually have been telling us how they would do it. How many Squishmallows would it take to literally just collapse somebody? And the next question that comes with that, obviously, is how much weight is that? It's really hard to find out. I found an article by Force Science that looks at how much it takes to break ribs. And I'm a male in my 20s, so for a male in their 20s, it's about 570 pounds. Can you just stop for a second? Yeah, I guess. We need to talk. I think this might be a general testament to just not taking everything that you see on the internet at face value, because admittedly, I kind of did. It was hard to find a specific number for crushing someone because everyone's so different. So I found a website that came to a literal weight, and I just kind of went with it. Looking into this more, this article and Force Science in general is absolutely ridiculous and makes some claims that are completely untenable. I need to talk about it. I wouldn't feel right continuing without at least saying something about this source. So I'm going to be talking about police brutality, asphyxia, and just general dark stuff. If that's particularly upsetting to you, or if you just want to watch the funny Squishmallow video with that guy, I completely get that. Just skip to the time that's somewhere around here, probably. So to put it simply, this article outlines an experiment where scientists took a fake body and put weight on top of it to see how much weight is needed for compression asphyxia, effectively killing a person. But this website, this study, and the scientists that did this study use it to make some really ridiculous claims about arrest-related deaths, or ARDs. The article calls medical examiners and the attorneys that fight for victims of police brutality a parade of horribles, so there's clearly a bias here, and this is a direct quote. "Sometimes when people fight the police, the human body just seems to run out of gas for reasons that aren't understood. These are not murders, yet the explanation is not clear." There's also a push by the scientists that did this study for a new category of death to be made, arrest-related death syndrome, saying we can name it first and understand it later. And that's a pretty bold thing to do when you're talking about someone that only died after being physically involved with the police. And that can obviously be used to acquit cops, even though the parade of horrible medical examiners already think they know what caused this death. We just have no idea why this happens. and so it can't be the cop's fault. So I have a pretty big epistemological issue with this study, mainly stemming from the methodology and the conclusions that they make with those methods. This test looked only at compression asphyxia without accounting for other factors based on how the person might be restrained, if and when the cop on top of them moves or they move, really anything else in a real life scenario. It's done completely in a vacuum. And what they're testing for is specifically when ribs start to crack, causing compression asphyxia, which is something that doesn't really need to be studied in terms of police brutality. If a cop is on someone and their ribs break, the evidence is there already, right? So they're looking at just one specific factor, and you could definitely argue that that's good science, and it's not entirely useless, especially for a project like mine, where I do want to know literally what it would take to crush some ribs. But that's not how it's interpreted at all. The scientist literally says it would take two 285-pound cops standing and balancing on the back or chest of a suspect to produce compression asphyxia. It doesn't even look at the fact that cops can use force, right? If I'm holding someone down, I'm not just using my body weight, I'm using my muscles. I'm using whatever I can to keep them down, right? Doesn't talk about it. All it's asking is, literally, if people sat on someone and did nothing else, when would they kill them? So it's using ridiculously specific data that is not applicable to the real world and coming out with the claim that sometimes people just die and we should classify their death outside of the cops who caused it, allegedly. Why weren't these experts consulted in the George Floyd trial? This could be newly discovered evidence that could acquit Officer Chauvin. The reason these experts and this evidence wasn't talked about is because it's not fucking relevant. It doesn't have any basis on what it actually takes to kill someone. They contorted and stretched their data enough to get a headline essentially saying a policeman could not kill you with their body weight alone, regardless of any other factors such as, I don't know, where their knee is. So yeah, I just flat out don't agree with a lot of what this paper and this article are saying. I hope I did a good job of explaining kind of why I find it concerning. And I think it's important to call out these things as concerning when we see them. For the purpose of my project, I actually do want to know how much weight it would take without extra force to crush ribs. And that's really all this does. All the other fluff is bullshit, and I wanted you to know that it's bullshit. Sorry about that. It got a little deep. I didn't necessarily plan on going into this. Back to it. So 570 pounds is a lot of weight. How much do Squishmallows weigh? It really depends on which one you're talking about. Thanks to Faded Squishmallows on Instagram, this is an exact graph of the general weights. Obviously, they differ all the time, but the general weights for the different sizes of Squishmallow. Obviously, the biggest Squishmallow has the most weight, gonna be the best fighter, right? Sizes do not scale with these squish fuckers. So basically, an 8-inch one and a 16-inch one, yeah, the 16 is double the size, but it's not gonna be double the weight of the 8-inch one. So I think the only fair way to do this is to find their kill power per square inch. Taking the volume of these guys into consideration when we count the weight gives us a kill power, and it's pretty interesting because the 8-inch just comes out in a landslide, basically. I think this is because the majority of the weight comes from the face and the mouth, the features that are obviously very detailed. The fluff inside is virtually nothing, and the wrap, like the fabric around it, sure is something, but it's not as much as the fabric on the face, right? So the 8-inch, I think, is that perfect sweet spot where it has a detailed face and it doesn't get too large that it starts to lose out. If you look at the 20 and 24-inch, the face doesn't get a whole lot bigger. So really all you're doing is increasing the amount of fluff in there for your size. You're not bringing any meaningful weight into the discussion. So if we're talking about squishing someone, you're going to want to do it the most efficiently. Any good militia would. The Squish militia will too. It's going to be the 8-inchers. So from here, it's pretty simple, right? 570 pounds to squish murder someone. A Squishmallow, the 8-inchers are 0.4 pounds per mallow. So that gives us 1,425 or about $30,000 worth of Squishmallows, which if they're able to condense themselves well enough, they turn into a cuboid shape of 68 by 68 by 69 inches. So this is where we relate things to the general public. In order to kill the average man, the cuboid of Squishmallows that would have to do so is roughly the size of the average man, just a couple inches short. This is bizarre, right? I could not believe when I found this statistic because I think it's really variable to sizes. Like we kind of talked about, it's really hard to figure out what it would take to actually crush someone. I think the biggest reason why is because it's hard to test that without crushing people, which it wouldn't be very cool. You don't really fully know how many squishmallows it would exactly take to kill you. But if you're smaller than the average man, your frame can take less than the average man. We're talking about bones here. It's just what they can handle. It's going to take less squishmallows to kill you. If you're super big, obviously more. So the general rule now is if you are walking down the street and you see a pack of squishmallows that is roughly the cubic size of you, you need to get out of there as fast as you can.